Greetings everyone, I hope you had a great week, a busy week, so you can enjoy your rest over the weekend better. Today I'd like to tell you a story. 20 years ago, I went out for a picnic for Labor Day in Romania, which is how we call the 1st of May, and it's traditional to celebrate it with picnics. At this picnic I tried to run across a small ditch in platform shoes, and I broke my leg. I had to have 2 operations. I had to have nails stuck in my ankle and a plate attached to my shin, and I had to spend a month in a cast. It wasn't the best of times for me. But the important thing when such accidents happen is to know whose fault it was. And clearly it wasn't my fault, because I'm a rational human being, I'm a logical human being, and I can use my brain. So whose fault it was the white wine that I drank in the hours prior to my attempt to run across the ditch. Well, clearly alcohol makes you do stupid things. It compromises your assessment making skills and so on and so forth. So clearly it was the wine's fault. I'm happy to say that I'm seeing this attitude of blaming others for what happens to you alive and well, even at the highest levels of power and decision making. Like for example, this week President Biden struck at the oil industry again by telling oil companies that giving cash back to shareholders is not the same thing as lowering prices at the pump. I was a little bit confused initially, because I didn't think anyone thought that giving cash back to shareholders is the same thing as lowering prices at the pump. And I also thought, but just for a second, I promise, I also thought that keeping prices at the pump low is not exactly the responsibility of oil companies, because they are businesses and every business wants to make a profit, including by selling their products at higher prices when the market calls for higher prices. And I thought that it was the government's responsibility to try and control prices, which Biden's administration has done. But apparently, according to the president right now, it's the oil company's responsibility to keep prices at the pump low, which is genius. You have to admit it. He's throwing the ball into their court, even for things that his own administration should be responsible for. So President Biden, the US president, is one great example of this attitude of blaming everyone else but yourself whenever something bad or unpleasant happens. But he's not the only one, of course. I said it was quite popular, this attitude. And I just saw it this week in a scientific study published in The Lancet, not some small, regional journal. This study had 100 or more than 100 authors, which is very impressive. And it was about how people are getting sicker these days, both physically and mentally, because of climate change. And yes, you probably guessed it, it's all the oil industry's fault. Why? Because the oil industry is the oil industry. No further explanations are needed. If it produces oil and gas, then it is to blame for all pollution-related health problems, illnesses, including fatal ones, and is also responsible for the surge in anxiety. They're even calling it climate anxiety. And I am sure all those activists and politicians who have been doomsaying, basically saying that the world will end in 12 years, or we have 1,200 days to live, things like that. I'm sure they had nothing whatsoever to do with this increase in anxiety, especially in children, because children are quite impressionable and they get easily swayed because they can not discern between reality, propaganda, fear-mongering, and interesting things like that. So it's all the oil industry's fault, and I'm sure these scientists, they're brilliant because they're scientists, of course, they should be. There was no mention in the news release that I read. I didn't read the whole study, so I may be wrong, I may be misleading you, and they may have, attributed some of the responsibility for more illness across humanity to the fear-mongering and to the alarmism when it comes to the climate change. But I'm sure they did not use any electricity to produce their research, and I'm sure they used zero plastic products to do it, and no laptops, and they only walked everywhere, because even cycling, the bicycles, have something to do with the oil industry, dyes and rubber for the tires and so on. So this is why it's so brilliant. This is why I admire the way these scientists blame the oil industry for pretty much the biggest evil under the sun, people getting sick, without acknowledging the fact that everyone uses the products of this oil industry willingly and gladly, and often at a profit. Yes, my last story for today is about the International Energy Agency, one of my favorite organizations, which took things further. It, in the past, it has regularly blamed the oil and gas industry for climate change and for a lot of things, including for not producing enough oil, which is, a virtuoso level of competence in blame laying. Because on the one hand, you blame them for ruining the environment and the climate by producing oil, and then you blame them for not producing enough oil because we need more than they're producing. But this week they went a step further, doing away with the blame laying, and instead returning to the peak oil and gas demand refrain. Because they can't be bothered with blaming anymore. Just tell the people that in 10 years the oil and gas demand will not be growing anymore. It will start declining because we'll have so much wind and solar, possibly some nuclear, for color, and we'll be perfectly fine. We won't need as much oil and gas as we need now. Can anyone guess what we could reasonably expect from the next World Energy Outlook to be issued by the IEA? Exactly, I'm sure they will once again blame the oil industry for not producing enough oil and gas. And with that, I'll leave you to another great week, hopefully warm week, or a bit cooler week, because it's been uncharacteristically warm down here. I know climate change is horrible, and I'm going to write a letter of protest to Big Oil and whatever other oil company I get the contact information of. See ya!